Welcome to Intro to Watercolor with Janet Van Eerden. This is Module 3. So today we are going to be talking about brush strokes and technique. So we've talked already about materials. Um, I will be using 140-pound paper. 300-pound paper is really, really absorbent, but most of my work I do on 140-pound. And if you do end up switching between them, you'll see that a lot of rules change because 300-pound is much more absorbent. So today I will be talking about different kinds of brush strokes and the effects that they can have in your work on 140-pound. We also talked at one point, I think, about taping down your paper. I'm showing you things today that have not been taped down, so you don't always have to tape things down. One of the considerations in that is if you tape it down to your workspace, you can't lift it or move it easily. If you put it on a separate board and tape it, then you can move that board. But oftentimes when I'm working, I just let the piece be so that I can pick up the piece and move it around so gravity can help me if I need that. So brush strokes and how they affect your work. I'm going to switch to my document camera quickly. Okay, so the document camera is on. I have a couple of samples of work, and I am not at home, as you can see from my background. So I wanted to show you the brushes I have with me. They are not all of, I have a lot more brushes at home, but these are the ones I packed for what I'm working on right now. And as you can see, they're all similar shapes, but they're different sizes. This is a Series 7 Winsor Newton size 3. This is a Blick size 8. This is a size 4 round. These are all round brushes. And then this is a detail brush. This is a size 1. So we talked, I think, in the last video, no, in the first video, about different brush options. There are so many. And I said then, and I'll say it again, the best brush for you is the one you use. And you will find that you get used to the brushes that you use. And I can see we're going to play a little bit with focus here. Um, but as you use your different brushes and you see what they can do for you, you'll get familiar with that, and that's part of the practice. I just got this last year for Christmas because I started doing some bigger pieces. I love this brush, but it holds a tremendous amount of water. So if I were to use a brush like this in a wash, it's going to be hard to control how much water I actually get on the paper. So um, this big one, which is a 2-inch flat brush by Princeton, I just love it. Even this one versus this one, the amount of water that will come in this size 8. If I'm working with the size 8 on a postcard size piece, a lot of water will be put down. So you'll just have to learn with trial and error and testing how much water is enough for what you're working on. Okay, so brush strokes. In this little watercolor scene, you can see there's a kind of a wash of a flat gray in the background. That would have been put down with clear water first, all over that area, and then very diluted, like we talked in the second video, a lot of water to give me this very light transparent gray. And in a painting like this, I did not use masking on these trees. So when I was putting my clear water in, I would have been very careful to get it down in around the trees, but leave the tree area not dry. So then the other thing that you want to think about as a watercolor artist is leaving the white areas of a painting white. So we call that negative painting. And so there's nothing here where that snow, you can see I penciled around the outside of the snow to indicate to save that paper and let it white. Um, a purist, quote unquote purist, tries not to use white in their painting and leave the white of the paper to be that. So then you can see the brush strokes around that white is what makes the white pop out. So I'm just using, again, you can see it's very diluted. So there's a great deal of water, especially in these first layers here that were painted underneath and around those white areas. With that darker tree branch back in there, it pops that white out into the foreground. So you have the illusion of those snow-covered branches. It's a really, really fun exercise. Now, like we talked in the second module, you would start with the lightest layers of those branches, and you can see I did go in and develop some darker areas. Whenever you're using a green, especially in nature, you want several versions of that color. So oftentimes I will add, like in a spring scene, I'll add a little bit of yellow. And I would think about the light source. If the light was coming here and this was a spring scene, then all of these branches on this side, I would be highlighting with a yellow mixed with green. So a green that has a hint of yellow in it as a brighter indication of where the light is hitting. You always want to think about your light source in a painting. But for this wintry scene, you can see that I did light glazes of some very, very washed out, diluted gray, blue. There's a little bit of blue in that to indicate the shadow. So I can see my light source is this way, even though it's very faint. So these branches that I've tucked a little bit of a darker wash in are going to build some form and some shade. So we have some interest. And I could have even bumped it up again with a more diluted color. Right now I'm looking at this thinking that at the base of these trees, they could use a little bit more shade. But again, this was just a little exercise. So I didn't do that. Let's see what happens if I do that right now, just for fun. I'm taking a little bit of cobalt blue, mixing it with some sap green off camera. Blue often is something that I will use to indicate shade. And it really does a nice job of adding depth. So where I'm pushing this blue-green into certain areas, that's going to push those areas back and show the form. Now, this video is actually about brush strokes. So you can see I'm using the very, very tip of this brush. If I were to press it down, which I'll show you in a minute, that's going to give us a different stroke, a different look, a different use. So you can see I'm painting in some shade. Oh, my camera's having some struggles focusing, but now what I'm going to do is go back in and blend those. I don't want harsh circles or lines where my brush touched down. So if I just take my damp brush up where I've put those brush strokes in, I can soften those edges and move it around a little bit. So as we talked in that flower exercise, building these is just layers of building layers of, I don't know why that's having trouble focusing. Building layers on your paper to show the form that you want to show. So I'm going to pull over. I always encourage people at my classes to have a scrap piece of paper next to whatever they're working on so that here's the little palette that I'm using today, something that's at my desk. So if I'm doing some let's say I'm doing some leaves. So I'm going to activate my green. And depending on if I'm working on a piece or not, let me move this over so you can see. I might mix up a little bit of yellow green there. And then I'm going to carry some of my green over to my blue. Excuse me. And let's see what we have there. So I'm going to grab some pure green back here. And a round brush, I can get a nice, whoops, you can't even see that. Let's see. Let me get here. Get you back on my camera. Okay, so so we can do lots of different things with this brush. We can make lines. We can make dots. We can, we're getting some detail in there. We can use that, just the tip of that brush. I do a lot of florals and botanicals. So if I'm doing a leaf, I want that pointed edge on the end, drag it a little bit, press the belly down, lift it up, and you get a lovely, lovely leaf shape. So you can see by the transparency in what I have that that's a very light green mixture. And while that's wet, we're going to cover this more in another section, but while that's wet a little bit, if I drop in, okay, it's not that wet because I had such a thin layer. If I drop in another pigment while it's wet, I can add to that and put a little bit of dark in there. Just experiment with what we talked about in the last two modules and differing brush strokes, because a couple of brushes will give you a lot of different options as far as what you're trying to build. And you can see, I don't know if you can see it on the camera or not. Paints will dry. I'm going to interrupt myself here. Paints will dry a little lighter than they look on the paper. So keep that in mind when you're doing what you're doing. There's a little bit of that sap green. I'm going to try to make this come to the top. Add another layer of that blue green that I just put in there and blend that out a little bit with my pushing that paint around. And then let's make a line down the center of this here. I'm not sure what kind of leaves these are, but they're my leaves, so we're just playing here. So you can see there, it zoomed out. I don't know why it was in so close before. You can see actually how much fun it is just to practice with making brush strokes. What you can do with them this is all on dry paper. So if you're doing this on wet paper, you will not get the outlined control that we're getting here. We're getting that because it's dry paper. And we're just experimenting with the belly of the brush is that round fat part that's holding the water and the paint. And I'm going to pull my towel over here. I need a little bit of blue green over here to match that other side of leaves. That's a lot of blue. So if you put down a color and you're like, whoa, that's a lot, you can, like we showed in one of the videos, rinse out the brush and dry it and use it almost to suck that up. Now I took more than I wanted away, but that's okay. Mix it on the paper a little bit. It is very easy to overwork paper. What that means is if I keep rubbing over and over and over on an area, I can pick up some of those fibers and really make a mess. It's easy to do. You're going to do it at some point. I've done it many times, but when you see how quickly it happens, then you can know that and anticipate and learn. Sometimes it's better to just walk away. Oh, I got some brown in that one, so we're going to just let that be okay. That leaf has a little bit of brown. You can see I picked up more pigment on that brush. So this is, again, this is going to be good practice with how much water and how much paint, and just what we talked about in the last videos. And you can see on this side, I have much more pigment on these couple leaves than I did on the other side, and that gives you a different effect. But all of these things are things that you can use when you're practicing. And I've made lots of just little sheets covered, a sheet covered with this. Actually, they were rhododendron leaves when I did them, one of them, and eucalyptus are also really, really fun to play with. So, but that's a cute little example of using the brush to make a leaf pattern. And you can see the leaf that I had a little brown grabbed in has that tone. And if you look at a plant, you know, maybe that has a little disease or just different coloration. So I feel like when you mix some different pigments into something like that, it's a little bit more believable. So lots of different brushstroke ideas. And I want to just show you some of those in another couple of pieces. So this little piece, I love winter scenes, and we're in for a big storm right now. So it's good that we can see the beauty in snow, but this piece shows a lot of different uses of brushes and brush strokes, amount of pigments, different colors. And so the way I did this piece, I drew this tree. I would have drawn this horizon line. And I drew a couple of little piles in the snow. I didn't draw much, but when you're doing this, a sky like this, you're going to cover this area with clear water. And I had a line here that was white and another line here that was white. So I dropped blue in around that, and you can see I got heavier with dropping my pigment in here and in here. And then this area right here, where there's a really nice soft edge blended between that dark blue and the cloud, is where I would have used a dampish, but dry brush on this harsh white edge and just rubbed it out just like that, so that I'm making that hard edge a little bit softer. And I wanted to preserve some of that crisp white of the clouds, but I didn't want the harsh, that's blue, that's all white. So that all of this in there is the same thing. I would have added a little bit of water in here and some pigment, and then use these blending techniques that we just talked about to soften any lines, and like a cloud, have some areas that are darker, some that are lighter, and then dropping in this area around my tree some darker, this is probably Payne's gray, so a little bit more pigment in there. And if you get too much color down or pigment, you can use a towel or a paper towel to maybe go in and pick up anything that you want to pick up. Now, some colors stain, so you might not get everything up that you want, but those kind of brush strokes in the sky can give you lovely, lovely cloud effects. Now you can see these trees on the tree line. These, let's see if I can get a close up of that without making everybody have a headache. You can see that I used a smallish brush in a vertical way with lots of different colors. So I probably started with the lightest green that you see in there. And I use my brush like this so that I'm indicating with my brush stroke the direction that there are vertical trees back there. I'm not painting every single tree. I'm showing my eye, my brush is making these marks that my eye will translate as trees. And just like we talked about earlier, we can go back in. Now, you can determine some of these areas that I dropped in pigment were done while the paper was still wet. I wanted some of that to diffuse out in soft lines, and it's quite a nice effect. And then there were other spaces where there are some darker areas that I put it down when it was dry. You can see those marks kind of stayed put. I just wanted to build up, actually push in some shaded areas, maybe underneath trees or tree trunks, so that you don't have, if you go like this down that slope, it's going to take your eye in this horizontal way, and you don't have the brush strokes then to translate that we have a tree scene here. I actually added the mountains after the trees were in because it needed something. So these, you're just taking whatever wash of gray or purple or blues, whatever you're doing to put in that mountain. And you can see this hard edge right here was done on dry paper. So I wanted the definition of those two different slopes. And here I put in a little bit of a shaded area. I probably need to do the same on this area. My light source, you can see from the shadow on the tree, is coming from that direction. And if you're doing shadows, you want to think about how the shadow is going to translate the surface. So you can see with my shadow, there are some piles of snow. And then the other thing that you can show with snow is tucking some blue in here. I'm painting shade behind this mound of snow to show that there are piles of snow. And then, of course, with my little detail brush, or the tip, I often use just the very tip of a brush with just a little bit of paint to paint some grasses in there. And so we see all kinds of different brush strokes in this piece. On the tree, and this is just a practice piece. This is probably nothing that will ever get finished and framed, but I painted the lightest version of brown here all the way up my tree. And then I came in with little brush strokes just to show some texture on the bark and some different colors in the bark as well to mix that up. But this is a great example of several different brush strokes helping you with the color to translate what you are doing. One thing, the last thing I'm going to show you is while you're working on brush strokes and all the things that we're talking about, different values, different transparencies, um, an abstract like this is a fabulous way to practice these skills. Pete Winklbauer, who was an art teacher in our town for 42 years and a great friend and mentor, was a master at abstract. And so I was admiring a piece that I love of his recently, and he would use these pieces like this to practice brush strokes and trying to keep a smooth hand and a straight line and straight application across a page like that multiple times it's great practice. And then working back into some of those areas with, you can see this got more transparent, and I use the brush to make that edge really uneven. And then in here, you can see much more concentrated pigment, letting some of that transparency come through, letting some of the white of the paper come through. But a piece like this, you can really let go of, I don't have to make it look like a tree or a mountain or a flower. I'm just having fun with colors. And these two colors are complements. They're opposite each other on the color wheel, and they really make each other look great. So really, really fun thing to do when you're experimenting with your brush strokes and all that they can do for you. So yeah, we're going to stop right there. I would love to see any of the work that comes from these. I'm going to switch my camera back. I hope that that little demonstration was helpful and that you look at the brushes you have and experiment with them, see what you can do with them. And I would love to see any of the work that you get from this posted in our community. So thank you so much for hopping on, and I'll see you in the next one. Have a great day.